talk about something that's on a lot of people's minds, whether we admit it or not: heaven. Today we're going to dig into a perspective that might just flip the script on how we think about the afterlife.
So just think for a second. How often do you really think about heaven? Is it, a comforting hope for the future? Maybe you see it as a reward for a life well lived? Or is it kind of like an escape plan from all the craziness down here on Earth? It's worth asking because the answer really shapes how we live.
It's funny, the idea of heaven is absolutely everywhere in our culture, especially in music. You've got Bob Dylan knocking on heaven's door, Led Zeppelin's legendary Stairway to Heaven, Eric Clapton's Tears in Heaven, even Belinda Carlisle, who is convinced that heaven is a place on earth. It's a theme we just keep coming back to.
And it's not always so serious. It's also perfect for a good joke. The source material told this great one about a couple who gets to the pearly gates. They'd waited 6 long weeks for St. Peter to find a priest so they could finally get married, but by then they'd changed their minds and wanted a divorce. St. Peter just throws his hands up and says, "Look, if it took me 6 weeks to find a priest up here, how long do you think it'll take me to find a lawyer?"
But all our modern questions and jokes about heaven, they're nothing new. This whole debate has really deep, ancient roots. And that brings us to the main story we're looking at today, a showdown that all started with a very clever and honestly pretty ridiculous trick question.
Now, to get the question, you first have to get who was asking it. These guys were called the Sadducees. They were a really powerful group back in Jesus' time, and they had one major belief that set them apart. They did not believe in resurrection, no afterlife. As the sermon joked, that's why they were sad, you see.
Okay, so these guys, the Sadducees, they try to trap Jesus. They want to show how absurd this whole afterlife idea is. So they cook up this wild scenario. A woman marries a man, he dies. So she marries his brother, he dies too. This happens with 7 brothers. So they ask, in the resurrection, whose wife is she? It's a total gotcha question, designed to be impossible to answer. But what's so brilliant here is how Jesus just completely dodges their trap. He doesn't even play their game. The Sadducees are stuck thinking about earthly rules like marriage contracts and how they'd work in eternity. But Jesus, he just shifts the entire conversation. He stops talking about the dead and starts talking about the nature of God, saying God is the God of the living.
And that move, that total reframing of the question, brings us right to the big idea in this explainer. It's about a massive shift in how we see the whole point. A shift from trying to get in to letting heaven in. The source really doesn't pull any punches with this quote. It basically says, if we think the whole game is just about getting our ticket punched so we can get into heaven later, we might have missed the entire point of what faith is all about. That's a pretty bold statement. So here's the pivot, right here. The goal we often hear is, how do I get myself into heaven? But the proposed goal is totally different. How do I get heaven into me, right here, right now? See? It just flips the whole thing around. And what's wild is that this isn't some crazy new idea. It's been hiding in plain sight this whole time, right in one of the most famous prayers in Christianity, the Lord's Prayer. Think about it. It doesn't say, take us up to your kingdom. It says, thy kingdom come, on earth as it is in heaven. It's a prayer for heaven to come down to us. Okay, so what does that actually mean for us? What does it look like to bring heaven to earth, to become a channel for God's kingdom? Let's break down the practical side of it. First off, it helps to know what we mean by kingdom of God. The sermon points out that Jesus talked way more about the kingdom than about heaven as a destination. The kingdom isn't someplace you go when you die. It's a reality you can live in now. It's that state of being where God's priorities, like love, justice, and mercy, are actually happening. Jesus said it was already in our midst. So how do we get there? Well, it's not about just sitting around and waiting. It starts with prayer, specifically that prayer for God's will to be done on earth. Then it's about actively opening our hearts and minds to it. That leads to action, actually trying to live with more love and compassion. The end goal is to become people who carry God's grace out into the world with us. A really concrete example of this is the Eucharist, or communion. In that ritual, heaven and earth are seen as literally meeting. When believers take the sacrament, it's a physical symbol of taking God's grace into themselves, so they can then take that grace out into their communities. When you start to think this way, it really does build a faith that's for the living.
It moves the focus away from just speculating about what heaven will be like and puts it squarely on taking action in the life we have right now.
You've probably heard that old saying that some religious folks are so heavenly minded, they're no earthly good. But here's the interesting twist. The source mentioned research that actually suggests the opposite. Christians who think a lot about heaven are often more likely to be out there doing good in the world.
I think this quote from the scholar William Barclay just nails it. He basically said, we'd all be better off if we just stopped trying to guess what heaven is like and instead just trusted in the love of God.
So let's be super clear. The point here isn't to stop believing in heaven at all, not one bit. The idea is to trust God with the details of the afterlife and to focus our energy on living out heavenly values, love, mercy, forgiveness, right here, today.
So, I'll leave you with this final thought to chew on. When you look at your own life, your own faith, which way does it lean? Is it more about getting yourself into heaven someday, or is it about the messy, beautiful, daily work of getting heaven into you?